The Spanish expected that any fighting would be at close quarters. That was how sea battles had always been fought. But the English had a new kind of warfare in mind. They intended to sink the Spanish at long range.
What was new was that the English were carrying into action much heavier gun batteries than anybody had done before. And the Spaniards were well aware of this, and they were intensely concerned that they were going to find themselves facing a weight of gunfire which they couldn't possibly match.
And this was the weapon the Spanish feared most, the long-barreled cannon known as the culverin, or snake. To the English, it was a ship killer, but would it prove the decisive factor in sinking the Spanish?
Culverins are characterized by having these long, slender barrels in relation to their caliber. The caliber of this gun's about 5.5 inches. The reason for this long proportion is probably because they believed that you get the maximum benefit from the burning powder charge in the long barrel, and it would probably fire quite accurately as well. But it's a high velocity weapon. I mean, we're getting a very fast moving cannonball going more or less straight where you aim it.
For the Elizabethans, it was a super weapon. But how deadly was the culverin? Nick Hall is about to put this replica to the test on a modern firing range. '16th century gunnery was a black art with few scientific principles. Gunners worked by trial and error, and their knowledge of ballistics was limited. But on paper, the culverin appeared formidable, with a range of over 600 yards at 0 elevation.
Okay, distance is 307 meters over.
Nick Hall and his colleagues are examining these claims using 21st century tools, high-speed cameras, and Doppler radar.
Undercover!
Gun ready.
Stand by. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, fire!
The culverin's opening shot is well over a quarter of a mile, already close to the performance claimed by the Elizabethan gunners.
Did you get that muzzle velocity?
No.
408 meters per second, and the distance for the long-range warm-up shot was 477.8 meters. So 477.8 meters. I mean, that's good. So that's almost horizontal, isn't it? And that's nearly the range that Born in 1587 is saying with 666 yards.
Yeah.
What those early gunners could not have dreamed of measuring was the speed of the cannonball leaving the muzzle. At over 400 meters a second, the 24-pound iron shot is traveling at above the speed of sound. The culverin, then, has a powerful reach, but how accurate is it? We know that the Spanish feared above all the sharpshooting of the English gunners.
Philip II briefed his commanders that the English would try to shoot low. They would try to damage the Spanish hulls, ideally just below the waterline.
So what do you think we are? We're slightly left?
Well, I thought
We're slightly right.
we're slightly
Slightly
right,
right,
but
aren't we?
It's time to try the culverin against a target, just 10 feet square, but the thickness of a ship's hull. The target is 150 meters away, the gun barrel dead level.
3, 2, 1, fire!
But the cannonball flies high.
on the negative side, we missed the target by an appreciable amount, but we would have had a very good hit on the ship.
It was well within the bounds of the ship, wasn't it?
Yes.
Striped markers indicate the overall length of the imaginary ship, but only a direct hit on the woodwork will produce real damage. Wooden galleons were surprisingly hardy, as the Elizabethan gunners soon found. It was one thing to hit the enemy, but to sink them needed repeated shots on target. Accurate and consistent fire at a time when most sailors had no knowledge of maths or science. Our present-day gunners have different problems. 21st century know-how ought to give them an edge, but their mental arithmetic seems to confuse even them.
We reckon it was about 6 foot higher, so we want to come down about 12 feet, don't we?
Well, that's
4
not
meters.
30
4
centimeters,
meters.
is it?
4 meters want to come down?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's that in mils?
4 meters in mils.
4,000.
That range?
A mil subtends a meter at 1,000, so at 100 it subtends 0.1 of a mil.
I'm sure you're right.
The logic is clear enough. If the shot is flying too high, the gun must be lowered. But the muzzle's already below horizontal.
About there?
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, fire.
Amazingly, even with the gun pointing down, the shot is still going skywards. The experts agree to aim lower still.
The shot went straight over the top of the target, and I saw it impact in the ground at about 1,000 meters. So it's gone well over the top of the target. So we'd actually need to lower the elevation quite considerably, I think.
But in reality, how much more would you depress a gun?
We probably want to come down almost 100 mils, so we were looking at bringing it down about 4 or 5 degrees.
But the radar will tell you whether it's hit.
Respect is rising for the English gunners of 400 years ago. It's hard enough to aim the Culverin on dry land, let alone on a pitching warship in full sail.
Well, is this it?
That's it, isn't it?
Well, that's perfectly in line. Look at it.
And suddenly recognition dawns. The reason that the shot is flying high is staring them in the face. A telltale track where it's ricocheted off the ground.
Why don't we split the difference?
Well, maybe we just leave it where it is.
We're sure this happened from this firing and not one of the earlier ones.
Yeah, because we haven't
certainly
seen this
happened on this
slide.
one, yeah.
What did the radar?
Belatedly, the 21st century gunners realize they've been aiming too low all along. It's time to beat the retreat.
So what we've done now is effectively raised the gun by 40 minutes. So 40 minutes is about 10 mils. So therefore, theoretically, we should raise it 1.5 meters on the target. That would be 10 meters a kilometer. So that would be 1 meter.
They're averaging just one cannon shot an hour, with as yet no hits. The Elizabethan gunners managed exactly the same rate of fire, but even after 6 days at sea, they too had made little impression on the enemy. And such heavy long-range shooting had used precious powder and shot.
Of course, one of the big questions is why the English fleet or the Royal Navy was so relatively ineffective. It had the advantage of the weather gauge, it had the advantage of the fast maneuverable ships, it had the advantage of heavy artillery, yet had to break off the attack because it was using up too much ammunition, and it had had very little to show for itself.
It was round one to the Spanish, and with English hopes crumbling, the way was now open for the Armada to follow through with its long-planned invasion. In Flanders, the soldiers of the Duke of Parma were waiting. These were the crack troops that would lead the Spanish invasion of England. All that was needed was the ships to get them there. Out in the Channel, the Armada had left their English pursuers trailing. But a crucial flaw now appeared in the Spanish invasion plans. Their commander, Medina Sidonia, discovered there was no port large enough for him to take Parma's army on board.
Medina Sidonia was clearly extremely worried about what the outcome would be, because he didn't really see how this vital link-up with the Duke of Parma was actually going to take place. He began to realize that total disaster was in the offing.
For 6 days, the Spaniards had run the gauntlet of English firepower in the Channel. Now they had no choice but to heave to in open sea. They were at anchor and vulnerable, and the weather was turning. The English had a plan. A handful of ships would be sacrificed. Soaked in pitch and set ablaze, they would become weapons of terror, carried on the rising tide deep into the Spanish fleet. With their defensive shape broken, the scattered Spanish troopships made easy targets. For the first time, the English could now close on the enemy.
This is the point at which the English started firing at very close range. And this is the point, it's clear, when Spanish ships are beginning to suffer serious damage and heavy casualties.
At long range, the English guns had been ineffective. Now, at close quarters, they proved fearsome.
We are beginning to see, I think, enormous damage being inflicted on the Spanish ships. Their decks have been raked by round shot. Swathes of splinters are scything through men. Anything with soft tissue is being cut down and severely damaged. Rigging, structures of the boat are being smashed. The Spanish effectively are taking a terrible pounding at this stage, and the hammering is getting worse, getting more and more intense.
Yet while the English were out shooting the Spaniards, they still had difficulty sinking them. Medina Sidonia's flagship was hit 200 times but kept sailing, and the English powder and shot were almost spent.
They were firing, in comparison with the Spaniards, much more quickly, much more effectively, and causing real damage to the Spanish ships. But it was relatively limited. They just didn't have the ammunition stocks to keep up the continuous attrition which is necessary to physically disable or sink a wooden ship.
Quite frankly, there was not enough firepower going down to stop the Armada. We could not put enough weight of fire into various vessels to slow them down. Otherwise, we would have expected far higher casualty rate.
Go to slightly more elevation, it's not a problem.
7 degrees?
Even at close range, it seems, the English still had a problem achieving the consistent and accurate fire that they needed. So can our present-day gunners do any better? Just as their predecessors closed on the Armada, they too are hauling in their target to just 50 meters. Drake would have approved.
1, fire! 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 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, fire! Oh, I heard something.
What happened?
I saw the ball, or what I thought actually was a bit of the target flying off.
Oh, God, that's impossible.
War is hell, but this is worse. Firing at a fixed target at point-blank range, a fusillade of gunfire has brought just one tantalizing, possible strike.
I wonder whether it just kissed the top, which would give you a sound. Look. I'm right.
What?
Look.
It's either the narrowest of misses or a glancing hit. Nick knows which theory he favours.
And it gave a dong, didn't it?
It was definitely a dong.
I'm not just clutching at straws, but I'm convinced the sound was right.
Yeah.
And I think that that bright piece of metal there on the front of that, or the edge of that flange, and the bit of muck on that flange.
Then it went off to the right, didn't it?
I was going, that I was going to see a hole in the target because I just saw the ball. Most of the target was hidden by smoke, and I thought then, as the smoke cleared, I'd see a hole. And obviously we didn't. It's just a question of...
Oh, do you want me to...
No, I'm not going to fall.
There's only one way to prove it. Time to inspect the evidence close up.
Would I get down against nothing?
No, and then what is it? It looks like
I thought that was some nice gunpowder fouling. That is from the forklift.
Right. Grease from the forks. More
I think I might have to retract.
How are you going to get down now?
I don't know.
400 years ago, the Elizabethan gunners were also left high and dry. They had put their faith in heavy guns like the Culverin, but that hadn't been enough.
Every generation has its new super weapon. They all think it's going to work wonderfully. They've all done trials. But when it comes to the real war, somehow things are different. Well, it was the same with their new heavy guns. It didn't work as well as they thought it was going to, and they were a long way from having worked out the most effective ways to use smooth-bore, muzzle-loading guns.
The Spanish were battered but unbroken. The English in good order but desperate for ammunition. No glorious victory, just a standoff.
It was essentially a draw. Neither had achieved what it wanted to achieve. The Spaniards hadn't landed in England, but equally, the English hadn't defeated the Spaniards. The Armada was still in good order, its discipline, formation was intact, and it was still a very formidable force.